couple days ago, I was at the Los Angeles Open, a Go tournament. Interestingly enough, not in Los Angeles, but in a city called Roland Heights, which is, I think that's in LA County, so I guess that's maybe why it's called the Los Angeles Open. But I think it was the first of the series. Hopefully it is a recurring event and it will be held in future years as well. But I had a fantastic time at the tournament, and more than just the games that I enjoyed, I also very much enjoyed talking to some of the players at the tournament. Starpoint gave me a bit of an excuse to get out of my comfort zone and approach some people and talk to them a little bit because I wanted some interviews. So stay tuned for a future episode where I will compile those interviews and let you hear what some of y'all have to say about things, and so you can take a little break from my voice. But today you're going to be hearing a lot of my voice because I'm going to be talking about my own experience at the Los Angeles Open 2024. Welcome to Starpoint, the show about Go for Go fans away from the board. And let's just start right from the beginning, and I'm just going to go through all the little details and nitty-gritty of the tournament itself. So this was in Roland Heights, as I mentioned previously, and this would be my third tournament. My first couple tournaments were in a little cafe called the Unurban, which is where the Santa Monica Go Club is held. And then the second one was in the back of a bowling alley, which sounds super shady, but actually it was just one of those big rooms where people rent out for parties and things like that. Actually, not a bad location for a Go tournament. So I was kind of thinking it would be along those lines for this one, but I show up. I didn't read the details of where this tournament will be held, because I was surprised to come to the address of a Best Western hotel. And so then I just make sure that I'm in the right place, and I look up the website again, and sure enough, I am supposed to go into the Best Western. I go in, and I'm directed to the conference room. And so there was a conference room on the first level of the hotel, and lo and behold, a bunch of Go boards. There's a little registration table up front. I pay the $30 tournament fee, and then an additional $10 for my one-time tournament pass. For those European listeners who are wondering how that works, basically there's like an AGA membership you need to have AGA-rated games, but they allow you to just do like a one-time pass. If you're someone who doesn't do tournaments all year round, maybe it's not worth getting the full membership, you can go ahead and get like a little $10 pass to have those games rated for that tournament. It was a lot of Go boards and a lot of tables set up in this conference room, and quickly people started rolling in, and it became super, super packed. I am certain we broke a couple of fire codes in that conference room. I think the tournament director said that they were expecting like 60 people to sign up, and it turned out to be like 100. So it was very hot and muggy in there at times, although the air conditioning blasting helped a lot as well. But honestly, it was like chairs were back to back to back, and then like while you were playing your games, you really couldn't scoot back at all. I was basically pressed up against the table while I was playing my games, and I mean, I didn't feel that it bothered me as soon as I got into position, but getting around the room was crazy because there were so many chairs and so many people. You had to find like this maze throughout and snake your way through one end of the room to the other. It was wild. It was really great seeing so many different Go players of so many different levels. I've met Go players from 30Q to 6 Dan. I love the variety there. I love that it's not just one level of play at the tournament. It's not just the strong players showing up. It's not a whole bunch of weak players showing up. It's a variety, and all sorts of people were showing up. And they're coming from places like San Diego and San Francisco, San Jose, making really big drives to come to this tournament. That's not something that I do. I stay within my locale. Just to give you an overview of the tournament, it was divided into sections, and this is kind of the way I've seen tournaments go as far as I've attended. But basically, you have the open section, which is only for strong players, which is like 6 down and above. And then it goes down into the handicap section. So handicap section A is around 1 to 5 dan. Handicap section B is around, I thought it was 5 to 1 Q, but in the awards ceremony, they announced 3 to 1 Q. So I'm not entirely sure. Basically, like high-level Q players. And then handicap section C is still single-digit Qs, but a little lower level than that. And then handicap section D is the double-digit Q players. So, I mean, if you think of a tournament in its conventional sense, it's like you have this pyramid and there's this one winner, but with this organization, it's like you can kind of give out more awards and recognize more players and have them kind of divided into little divisions like this. And I like it a lot. So there were like the open section, there was the open section and then the handicap sections. And the tournament format, it was in AGA rules as it was an AGA rated tournament, which seems obvious. But one thing I really appreciated about the tournament director, who was Michael Zhao, if you have watched a NAGF Pro qualification, the one from the previous year, I believe he did some commentary on Twitch while they were live streaming that tournament. So you might recognize that name. But he was running the tournament, and he did a fantastic job of emphasizing certain points about the rules, because I think it's super, important to emphasize these rules. When you have a game like Go, where you have Chinese rules, Japanese rules, and different methods of counting, you have to have an agreement. Like, it doesn't really matter what you do, but there needs to be a clear standard for everyone to follow. Otherwise, you can get into these little disputes, which is not fun for anybody. But I really liked that Michael made a point to emphasize these rules and explain. I'll actually just show you a little clip over here of him explaining the rules right now.
Black have to give 7.5 to me, 7.5, okay? And very importantly, keep your prisoners with you, okay? And if everybody don't understand English, I'll say 保留食指, okay? Keep your prisoners with you. Don't throw it back somewhere. Or those are the points, okay? So at the end, if you think the game is over, you have to say pass. And give 1 stone back to your opponent to pass. Okay, every time you say pass, you have to give a prisoner back there. And white has to pass as well. But always, white pass last. That means if white pass first, black pass last, after white will have to pass twice, which means black will gain 1 point. Okay. Benefit.
Okay, so what he's explaining here is the passing stone convention of AGA rules. If you've never played with AGA rules before, there is a specific mechanism in place that flattens the territory and area counting dispute. As you know, territory counting and area counting are very similar, but they can sometimes end with different results. Well, with AGA rules and this passing stone rule, it kind of makes both of them have the exact same result. At the end of the game, you can use territory counting or area counting, typically territory counting because it's easier, but it will have the exact same result. And the way it works is whenever you pass, you have to hand over a stone to your opponent as a prisoner, and your opponent has to do the same thing. And if 2 passes are done in a row, then the game is over, except one more rule. White has to pass last. So if black passes first, white passes, and then they both each get a stone, evens out, nothing happens, game is over. But if white happens to pass first and hands over a stone to black, black hands over a stone back to white, and then white has to hand one more stone back to black. And this, I can maybe go into the details of this in a future episode with all the different rules and counting, but just trust that it works out, and this is how the AGA rules work. And this is super important. I'm really happy that he did this and took the time to emphasize this and tell us how important it is, because it was honestly a relief to me that everyone was on the same page and we were all going to just play with AGA rules. And it was important, especially because a lot of the people I talked to during the tournament, I found out that it was their first tournament. And I even talked to someone who came from China like a year ago, and this was their first tournament in the US. So, I mean, definitely something very important to explain to someone like that. And so I just really appreciated that clarity. I think Michael did a fantastic job of running the tournament. Also, being language friendly, able to, there are a lot of Chinese attendees, but also very many non-Chinese attendees. So having the ability to speak in those languages was also a huge asset for this tournament. I've attended a tournament before where sometimes they would like just explain everything in Chinese, and then I would just be like totally lost as to what was going on. Anyway, one other detail about this tournament, it was originally supposed to be 30 minutes plus some periods of byoyomi, but because they felt a little rushed, they decided to switch that time control to Fisher time. So that was an exciting thing because I'd never used Fisher time before, and I was kind of looking forward to trying it out, and I actually really, really enjoyed it. I did that time episode a while back, a different time formats episode, and a lot of the time formats I've actually never used, so it's hard for me to comment on it. But now that I've actually used Fisher time, let me just do a recap before I get into my opinion about it. But a recap of Fisher time, the way it works is every time, so you get a basic set of main time. For us, it was 30 minutes. Every time you make a move and you hit the clock, you see your time jump up 10 seconds. So that's the bonus time increment that we get for this tournament. And so every time you make a move, you get 10 seconds back. So that means that if you make a move in less than 10 seconds, that means you're increasing your main time. If you make a move in more than 10 seconds, you are decreasing your main time, but you will still get 10 seconds back. So you didn't use as much time as maybe like you might have thought. So why is this interesting, and why is this an impactful change to the tournament? Well, I mean, apparently it allows you to predict the time and end the game faster. I'm not really sure exactly how the math works out for that, but from a player's perspective, the thing that I immediately noticed was that I didn't have to look at the time as much as I did with byoyomi. Because with byoyomi, there is like, you lose something when the byoyomi hits 0. You lose a period of byoyomi. With Fisher time, it's not so dramatic. You burn through 10 seconds of Fisher time. That's not like you're losing a period of Fisher time. It's just you've burned some of your main time. And it's just proportional to the amount of time that you use. So if you want to take some time, you don't have to look at the clock and say, like, how much byoyomi seconds do I have? How much of do I want to spend a byoyomi period on this move or not? And I have to make that decision? No, it's not like that. It's like, do I want to make a quick move under 10 seconds or not? And I felt a lot more relaxed using Fisher time, which is something I didn't expect, just from reading about how Fisher time worked. And going forward, we should just use Fisher time. I like byoyomi, and I wouldn't be against using byoyomi, but after using Fisher time, I feel like it's just something that I prefer from now on. I can just, if I feel like I'm getting pressured and running out of time, I can make a series of moves to just build up my time a little bit and then spend some more time on another move. I feel like it felt like more of a natural way to manipulate the time as well, rather than making, like, as with Byoyomi, you are thinking and thinking and thinking throughout the entire Byoyomi, and then the last split second you make a time Suji. That kind of play, it's stressful, honestly. I think, and that's my opinion on Fisher Time versus Byoyomi that I recently just kind of discovered after this tournament. So anyone wants to chime in on that opinion, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. Another thing that I noticed while playing these live games, and this is something I've noticed in previous tournaments as well, but I'm noticing it more because it's my third tournament, and it's like I've gone to enough that I feel like I can recognize certain patterns about the way the game feels. There is a certain carefulness to the game that I don't feel present in the online format. It's hard to explain, but I feel like the stones, they just feel more precious when you're playing them, and you feel like you really want to protect them and you want to make them work together, and you're not being as reckless. That's just the qualitative thing that I've noticed. The other thing that I've noticed is how I need to work on endgame. I don't know why. Maybe online play, I just don't care as much about endgame. But in these live games, I find myself thinking like, man, I really need to study more endgame. And I feel like that's a point that really turns the game in this live tournament setting. I'm not really sure why. Maybe it's because in online games, you kind of, sometimes you play a little haphazardly and you get into a lot of games where endgame doesn't matter as much, and so you're just not as focused on it. But in these games where there's like high stakes and you're in front of your opponent, it feels like you can really gain an edge by having good endgame knowledge. Yeah, that's just my kind of small observation there about like how the live games felt overall. I'll get into the actual games in a moment, but I also wanted to mention there was this guy that I met at the, if you remember, if you've been a long-time Starpoint listener, you'll know the first episode of Starpoint that I did, I talked about an event where I met a Japanese pro named Kenro Osawa. At this event, I met a super nice guy, and I met him at the Los Angeles Open as well, and he instantly recognized me, and I wanted to get an interview with him as well, but unfortunately the tournament ran kind of late, and he was honestly so helpful to me. He was rounding up people that I could potentially interview. He was just helping me with all sorts of things, and I really appreciated just his kindness. And I happened to be matched with him for game one. So let's get into game one. Game one, so he's like I think he's like about a Dan player. The handicap setting that was matched for us by the algorithm of the AGA or whatever was that we would play even with only 0.5 komi for white, with me playing black. And the game, one detail about this game, he brought his own stones and board, which was great because I don't know. I honestly, okay, so before I get into his equipment, overall, this tournament, I think, had really high quality equipment as well. So that's the other thing that I want to acknowledge about the Los Angeles Open here, because in previous tournaments, I've also kind of played with like those little vinyl plasticky boards with plastic stones that are sliding around. They're not heavy enough to stay in place. And, that's, you can play with those, but it's really, it just doesn't feel the same. And it's not just a nitpicking thing. It really, I feel, matters to the quality of the game that you play, and having decent equipment is really important. Now, I'm not saying that this tournament had like shell and slate stones for every, table. No, not at all. But they just felt like, okay, the stones are not like chipped and wonky and all assorted with different like sizes. They were at least somewhat consistent. The boards were okay, right? I did play one board that had like a crack in the middle of it. It was like two pieces of wood glued together, but honestly, not that big a deal. I'd rather play on a board like that than a rolling, like curled up plastic mat. Anyway, because of those issues, I assume my opponent brought his own stones, which was fantastic because, I mean, his equipment was the best equipment that I played with the entire tournament. So he asked like, "Oh, do you mind playing with my equipment?" I was like, "No, not at all." And we got to playing. The game was, let's see, it's hard to remember a lot of the games, but this game I felt there were some moves that I felt were strange that my opponent made. But then he explained to me in the review that why he made those moves, and it made a lot more sense. He was thinking in a very high strategic way that I was unable to see. But in the end, I ended up winning. I think he made a bit too big of a sacrifice, or he kind of didn't like the result in one of the corners and wasn't able to make up that loss. And so I ended up winning by a few points, and it was kind of a relief. It's always a relief to win your first game, because at the end of the day, I think a lot of our goals with these tournaments is to not leave without a win. And so just having that one win under my belt was a huge psychological advantage for the rest of the day. And so having that win was great. And my opponent was just so courteous. He told me I'm running low on time, and like that's not something that I would do. That's not something I would like point out to someone, but he was telling me that I was running low on time, and that even if I ran out of time, since I was nice to him, he probably wouldn't count that. And it got me really thinking about the spirit of Go and like what we're really trying to do here. Is it like to compete like with blood, sweat, and tears and a cutthroat attitude, or is it just to play this game and kind of be nice to each other? So he kind of showed me those values that I really appreciated. Maybe if you're in the higher up, the open level tournament, maybe that's not something that would happen as much. Maybe it's a little more important to be very strict at those levels, but at my level, I think maybe that's the way to go. So I enjoyed game one. It was I think it was a pretty game. I think it was a beautiful game. And I went into these games with a certain thing in mind. So I mentioned in a previous episode that I haven't been really playing that much. So I've been kind of on a break from Go. I haven't really been playing games, but I've been studying, and I've been trying to focus on opening theory and more abstract concepts. And so going into this tournament, my mentality was play star points and get my stones working together. Getting my stones working together was not something that was at the top of my list before. And so going into this tournament, that's something that I wanted to try to do. And of course, start points, I think, are probably the best moves to try to get that done, because they're flexible and I can kind of just adapt to my opponent's play to have my stones more in a flowing arrangement. And it seemed to work for game one. So moving on to game two, again, I played a Dawn level player, but this time I was given a 3-stone handicapped, and my opponent seemed to be flustered by the whole handicap situation. I think he lost the previous game, and he was just kind of making comments like, "Oh, I can't deal with this Comey," and things like that. And going into the game, I kind of sensed, so it was very different from game one, because the way he played, it felt like a Fox player, if anyone knows what that means. So he kind of played very careless and haphazard things. And I thought maybe that was his style, but after discussing the game, apparently he's kind of just like, there's no other way I can win. I have to. I feel that maybe the handicap thing is a psychological hurdle that strong players have to overcome when they're playing as white and they're giving their opponent like several stones of handicap, because this is a theme that I've noticed throughout the tournament, that it does seem to be a struggle for stronger players to get over the idea that the opponent is playing with all this handicap, especially like, I think if you're used to playing on Fox, because there's no handicap on Fox, whereas on KGS, OGS, handicap can be a very real thing depending on your settings on OGS. But I was happy to play handicap because I was going to play star points anyway. And while I was playing this game, his brother came over, started commenting on the game, which is a big no-no, by the way. If you're at a Go tournament, don't talk about a game in front of the game. But it was no big deal. He didn't say anything crazy. He just kind of came over and asked his brother, "Are you winning?" And and then my opponent says, "I think I'm losing." And then, which was, great to hear for me, to hear that my opponent thinks he's losing. Big win in my head for me, because I'm always wondering. And then after a while, his brother standing over the board says, "Yeah, he's basically got the whole middle area." And that's when my opponent shushes him. And then I give out this big hearty laugh. And then his brother skedaddles. And sure enough, game 2, I was surprised to also win this game by just a few points. So I was happy at this point to be 2 wins for 2. And I was like, kind of like, if I lost my next 2 games, I'd still be pretty happy with that. So moving on to game 3, this opponent gave me 5 stones. They were just like pitting me against higher and higher Don-ranked players with more and more handicap stones. I don't know how this whole algorithm, the pairing algorithm, works, but that's just what I was getting. And this opponent in game 3 was, I would say, even more flustered than my last. He kept on saying things like, "I don't think it's reasonable." And he asked me, "Did you lose your last games?" I said, "No, I won my last games." He asked me things like, "Is that your real strength? Let me just make sure it's really 5 stones." A whole bunch of comments like that. He was an interesting personality, but, not disrespectful at all. And we started the game, and he kind of almost got me to resign. There was a bad corner result where I basically lost all my stones, but I figured out how to make it a Seki. Now, there was a little bit of a, I didn't express my disagreement, but I had a little bit of a disagreement with him, although he is a much stronger player, so maybe his word is better than mine. But after the game, he claimed that group was dead, and that my play in the area he ignored brought it to life, or brought it to Seki. Whereas I thought it was Seki all along. I had made it Seki pretty early on, and I was just leaving it. And later on, when I played more moves there, I was actually trying to see if he thought it was Seki. Because like the way he would respond would tell me, is that Seki or not? And that wasn't the point where I almost resigned. The point where I almost resigned was shortly after that Seki situation. There was a huge snapback that I saw right after I played my move. And had he played the correct move for the snapback, I would have resigned. I was ready to resign. But instead of playing the snapback, he did a squeeze on it. And so I saved all my stones and I played on. So I was not feeling great about my game, but we played on, and he starts mumbling, and I can see that he's counting points. He's counting points all over the board again and again and again. I just can't bring myself to count during these games. It's just, I feel it takes too much brain power, takes too much time. Maybe it's something I need to develop as a skill. But watching him count points told me, oh, it's not a landslide. I might win. Like, it may be even, or if I'm losing, maybe I'm not losing by much, because he's counting points and he's trying to make sure. And so we count up the points at the very, very end of the game, and we were kind of unsure as to what we should do with the Seki situation. He pointed at it and was like, so what happens with those? So we just did a quick we asked somebody real quick, and they just said, oh yeah, that's just no points for anyone in any capacity, which is clear to me. And we counted up the points, and again, I won by a few points. It was wild. I was ecstatic. 3 wins at this tournament was not something I expected. I think this is the best I've ever done at a tournament, so it's a strange new feeling for me. And I was feeling good. Honestly, like, I was very happy, and I was happy with 2 wins. I was happy with 1 win, and I was even happier with 3 wins. So that was game 3, and this tournament was a 4-game tournament. It's quite a big tournament. I think 4 games in one day is a lot. It's a lot to do. But I did have 1 more game left, and this opponent. So while I was playing game 3, my opponent would turn around and complain to his friend, saying like, just like, I don't know, he was complaining in Chinese. And I didn't really understand what he was saying, but I guess his friend was my 4th opponent, because the first thing he says to me as I sit down is, I heard you beat my friend. And I kind of chuckle and I say, yeah. And his first move was, so I had 4 handicap in this one. I had 4 handicap. I played with black. In all the rounds. And so it was a pleasure playing against only stronger players. I mean, that's a privilege. But with this 4 stone handicap, you know what move my opponent makes for game 4? He does an elephant's move approach to the start point. That's like 2 diagonals away from the start point. Like, what? He plays that move, and I actually like said out loud, like, what is that? And then he just kind of like didn't respond. And then like he would play these weird cross cuts. He would attach and played a lot of strange things that made me kind of play suboptimally. I did not know how to handle a lot of stuff, and ended up losing the game by more than a few points, I would say, but it wasn't embarrassing. And so I lost game 4, and after the game, I asked, what did you think of my play? Like, were there any comments that you would like to make? And he kindly gave me his time to review some of the game, and he told me about all his moves. He said that the first move, the elephant's eye move that he made, that was basically anything I played after that probably wasn't terrible, but it's more of a mental move. And so he was playing psychologically. He was playing all these little tricks that he learned at the San Diego Go Club, I believe, from stronger players. And so he really, I think, had a good approach to the game, where he did understand this is a handicap game against a weaker player, and that's how I'm going to play the game. And I think maybe that's why he beat me. I'm not saying that he wouldn't have beat me if he didn't do those things, but it definitely helped. Whereas the other players, maybe they either didn't try enough to upset the game, or they tried too hard to upset the game with some complications without actually having any direction. Whereas my 4th opponent had a very specific strategy to take me down, with a bunch of knowledge that he had. And then I asked him for any advice that he has for my play, and I want to share with you this advice he gave me, because I think it was pretty good advice. He told me that sometimes I would make center plays, and center plays, sometimes they do have value, but oftentimes they don't have any value. So it's kind of hard to judge that sometimes for center plays. He said that while we're playing a handicap game, like with 4 handicap, AI says I'm about 40 points ahead to start the game. And so he said, if I were to play more moves that just took points, it would be very annoying for him. even just extending from live groups and things like that, that would have been harder for him to handle. And then I asked him if that was just for handicap games. He said just in general, but especially handicap games. So that is definitely something I'm going to reflect on and think about. And those are my 4 games. I'm so happy to have gone 3-1 at this tournament. It's way better than I thought. At game 3, I was hopeful, like maybe I'll go 4-4. But you know what? I'm totally fine with 3-1. I'm very, very happy with the result, especially since I entered as a 3Q. I was kind of doubtful, like, am I really AGA 3Q? And so winning 3 games at 3Q, not bad. I'm very, very happy.
Moving on to Division B. This is also the single-digit Q section. These are the fearsome Qs making their way to the showdown from 1Q to 3Q. Third place for the Division B goes to Justin O.
Congratulations. So that was me, a little taken aback. I admit, I was just recording for, anything that I might want to share with you for the podcast. And then I hear my own name for getting 3rd place in Handicap B section, which is the high level Q player section. And I got this little plaque. They gave out tons of awards for this event, giving out like 1st, 2nd, 3rd place for every single division. And then they had a number of awards after that as well. So, maybe you can kind of see it as something that's just a little meaningless award, but it meant quite a lot to me as someone who's been at this game for a while. Never really expected to win anything, and although it's, 3rd place, Handicap Section B, it's still very nice to have actually gotten a little bit of recognition for the amount of time I've put into the game, and I really like that about these tournaments. This is not the only tournament I've seen that has done this. A lot of the, I think, Go tournaments out here are very generous with recognizing a lot of the players, and I think that's a very good thing. Better to have more recognition for more players than to just funnel it all into one. And so I went home pretty happy. And as a bonus, so I told you about the $40 that I paid earlier for the tournament registration fee, as well as the AGA tournament pass. Well, as my prize money for getting 3rd place on Handicap Session B, I got that money back. I won $40, so I broke even for the tournament, and that was a nice little pleasant surprise for me. All in all, I really enjoyed my time at the Los Angeles Open, not just because I won 3 of my games, but a lot of interesting people that I met there really made it something worthwhile for me. And you'll get to hear from some of those people likely next episode, where I show you some of the interview clips that I got to take. I'm super excited to show you those as well. But for now, it's time for the DDK Advice Corner. And the tip of the day is something that I advised a player at the LA Open because they were kind of new. They were a little shy and didn't want to do an interview, but would be open to a lesson. So I give him a lesson, and one of the things that I told him was, don't just sacrifice stones without a reason. If you don't know why you're sacrificing the stone, maybe think twice about it and maybe save the stone. Sacrificing stones is a good thing. Like, it's good to reach for higher level play by looking at higher level players and noticing that they sacrifice stones, but you should know why you're doing it. If you don't know why, it might be a better play to just save those stones, because, if you're going to give up a Panuki in the opening, that's almost never a good idea. So compare the results of whether you sacrifice the stones and when you don't sacrifice the stones, and then see what advantage you're trying to gain by trying to sacrifice those stones. If you don't see a clear advantage, then maybe rethink that. So the DDK tip of the day was don't sacrifice without a reason. And now it's time for some Go news. This is just a little bit of fun news about Shinjin Saw throwing the first pitch for the LG Twins game. So the LG Twins is a Korean baseball team. I don't know much about Korean baseball, but they got a professional Go player to throw the first pitch for this game. And last time this happened, apparently, was in 2015, and it was done by Cho Eun-yeon. It's another Korean legendary player. And then Shin Jin-seo chose to wear the number 3 as his jersey, and said that he wanted to wear the number 3 because he won the LG Cup 3 times. So there was obviously some LG relation here between the LG Twins and the LG Cup. And then, he had a comment about after the first pitch. He said, I was so nervous that the pitch was a little disappointing, but it was an honor to have a good opportunity to throw the first pitch. That's such a Go player mentality. Like I did the first pitch. It wasn't up to expectations, but it was, I tried my best. Very, very much the way he talks about his own games. Okay, in other news, we got the U.S. Go Congress registration hitting 300. And this is significant because based on what I'm seeing here on this chart, that's a huge lead in comparison to previous years' Go Congresses. What I'm looking at on this chart at this point in registration of the Go Congress, the other congresses at this point have been all sub 200. And so this Congress is on its way to becoming one of the biggest ones potentially. I unfortunately won't be attending, but I'm envious of all of those of you who are able to attend. It's in Portland, Oregon, as I've mentioned in the past. And I'm excited to see what kind of events are held there and all the news and press coverage that will happen with the Go Congress. And I'm sure many of our favorite YouTubers will also attend and report back on some of the stuff that happened at the Go Congress as well. So look out for that. And then the next piece of news, this is this one is an interesting piece that I read about some time troubles in professional games. So recently, I don't know if you've heard, but Yang Kai-wen, a 9-dan in the Korean Go League, during a capturing race, he failed to pick up all his dead stones before pressing the clock. And he quickly pressed the clock and then picked up the last remaining stone on the board, and he was immediately declared to have forfeited. In likewise fashion, in the 2024 Women's Masters preliminary matches, both Zhang Mengyao, 3-dan, and Zhang Chongheng, 1-dan, were given warnings because they had committed similar time violations. Zhang Mengyao, in the 6th round match against Gui Shiyun, was worried about losing on time, so she just pressed the clock before picking up the stones, and that was a warning given out to her. And then Zhang Chongheng, in a round against Li Xiaoxi, failed to find like an actual valid capturing move. And I think, as if I'm reading this correctly, she picked up the stones without validly capturing them. And then so both of these players were warned and penalized 1 stone. So contrast this to the Korean League that was much more strict and actually just had Yang Kai-wen forfeit the game versus in this, I believe it's a Chinese national domestic, I think it's a domestic tournament for women. These 2 players were just given warnings and a 1 stone penalty. So Yang Kai-wen, after the game, apparently had posted on social media, "One of the most outrageous games I've ever lost in my life. I didn't finish capturing 1 last stone before pressing the clock and was declared to have forfeited due to a violation. I was told afterwards that according to Korean rules, you should stop the clock first before capturing stones, and that this was the first time I'd heard about it." That seems certainly stressful for Yang Kai-wen, although there is, obviously a need to enforce certain rules, but it kind of brings the question, like, how much leeway should we be giving? So, I mean, we got this Chinese method of doing it, which is a little more forgiving, but some may argue that this 1 stone penalty is a little arbitrary, and affecting the actual game score may not be the right spirit either. There are a number of these incidents as well in the past. For example, in the first game of the 36th Japanese Kisei title match in 1987, Takemiya Masaki was playing against Keito Masao, and Black was winning by half a point in the endgame, but Takemiya Masaki made a violation because he thought there was a capturing move and took the stones off the board incorrectly, and he immediately forfeited in that violation. So I guess Japanese and Korean rules are similar in that sense, but in a Chinese game, that would have been a single stone and a warning. So I think overall, there is a little bit of an awkward thing about Go where we do have it as a timed game, but there are certain moves that take more time than others where you have to pick up multiple stones, and the moment that becomes a factor, the moment you can start playing that to your advantage, it's probably when the rules have failed to kind of enforce the spirit of the game. So I understand the frustration of people who lose this way. I'm not really sure what the solution is, but I think maybe there should be kind of allowances for a certain number of captures or more. I think maybe if you're capturing a single stone, a couple stones, maybe even 3 stones, like that shouldn't affect your time strategy too much. But once you get into the 5, 6, 7 stone area, maybe an allowance should be made when I capture a group that big. An extra, amount of time should be given. Although that does complicate things a bit, right? We always try to go for some simplicity here. So it is a tough issue. I would love to know if anyone has their own thoughts on this as well. And then finally, I have Shin Jin-seo winning the 25th Maxim Coffee Cup. This is a Korean domestic tournament, and he defeated Kim Young-hoon. And so with this win, Shin Jin-seo is tied for 3rd place with the most wins in the Maxim Coffee Cup, along with Naindan Chechoran, which is kind of an old guard Korean strong professional, and also Isedol. So these two, Chechoran and Isedol, have won the Maxim Coffee Cup 5 times, and then Park Jung-hwan close after is the one with 4 wins of the Maxim Coffee Cup. So Shin Jin-seo, I guess depending on how you count it, he's either the 3rd or 4th. But that's it for Go News today, and it's time for listener mail. On the episode about Lee Se-dol's interview with Google, Sanguinarian Phoenix writes, "He looks young again in this interview. I remember watching a couple interviews during the last 2 years where it looks like he has aged 15 years since his AlphaGo match. Did anyone else notice he looks younger than normal in this interview?" Thanks for writing in again, Sanguinarian Phoenix. Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you there. He does look very young and youthful and happy and not stressed about playing the best Go that he can play. He's having fun making board games. Isn't that pretty cool? I didn't expect that. I thought maybe like Go players viewed Go as something very separate from board games, but seems like he's enjoying the process of making new games. So that's a very different thing compared to his other professional life, and maybe it's something that his blood pressure is benefiting from. Thanks for writing in. Ferran writes, WRT becoming a pro. Again, he did say something similar a few years ago. Can't quite remember when, but I think it got posted to L19. I apologize. I don't know what you mean by WRT. Would love some clarification on that. Continuing on, then, about the opening. One of the reasons I stopped following the European Online Pro League was what I call the oil spill theory of openings. There was a game where after the first 4 moves, not one of them was more than 1 space away of a previous stone, for about 100 moves, if I recall correctly. These kind of games throw me off. Well, thanks for writing in, Fran. I'm curious to know how you came up with this phrase "oil spill theory." What about the game kind of reminds you of oil spills? I love that Go it's just dots on a board, but there are so many images and things that come to mind when we think about the game. But yeah, I mean, I can see that if there's a certain repetitive pattern to pro games, that they may not be as interesting. But usually they don't stay that way for very long. I don't keep up with the European scene, so or the European Online Pro League, I guess. So I don't really know. I can't really comment on that specifically. But usually when there is a long, boring period of time, and that's just not just applies to Go, but pretty much anything, it just gives more opportunity for the next exciting thing to come in and just take the stage. Well, that's my little optimistic spin on how I view these periods of boredom and monotony, and I think that's what you're trying to get at, Fran. But anyway, thanks for writing in. And for the question of the week, I want to hear your tournament stories. I want to hear all about any kind of memories that you have with going to a tournament, or if you have any trepidation about going to a tournament. There were quite a few first-timers at this tournament. I was surprised. A lot of the answers that I got for whether you go to tournaments often, whereas this was their first tournament. So it's never too late to go attend your first tournament. I think it's a great experience. So whether you've gone or not, I'd love to hear about what you think about tournaments and whether you have memories about them or you have other trepidations about them. Share those in the comments on the Reddit post to this podcast episode or on YouTube, or you can email me directly at starpointpaduk@gmail.com. That's starpointbaduk@gmail.com. If you're a YouTube listener, I would greatly appreciate a like and a subscribe. And if you're a podcast listener, I'd also appreciate a review or a rating. Thank you so much to Chris M. and Jeffrey H. for supporting Starpoint. And they had at the Los Angeles Open, they had all this food out for anyone to just kind of grab. And, they didn't have any cheese. They had croissants and like chips and things like that. No cheese. But if they did have cheese, they would have whey cheese. Thanks for listening. Keep playing Go.